Thanks again for staying with Africa News Network First Fast Live, and good evening if you've just joined us. My name is Cindy Mabi. President Jacob Zuma and ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa disagree on the State of Capture Commission of Inquiry. The two leaders differ on the scope and terms of reference for the probe. President Zuma believes the scope should be beyond, or rather should go beyond Advocate Thuli Madonsela's report. However, Ramaphosa says a separate process can be initiated once the issue at hand has been dealt with. The two leaders' disagreement on the crucial issue raises questions about whether the presidency or the ANC is the center of power.
Those who are saying that there were certain things that happened in the past which could amount to state capture also needs to be looked at, fair and good. So we need to then say, how do we look at that? Now, the current situation was given rise to by clear allegations. There could well be evidence of a state capture type of situation from 1994, 1948, even 1652. I'm a student at history, and I know that, yes, there could well be from 1652. But that has to be a separate process. If you go back to 1652, 1948, or 1994, you're going to be involved in a commission for the next 5 years. And yet this one, you've got the documentation, you've got the witnesses, you've got the actors right now, and investigate that, finish that. If you want to do 1994, start another process.
Meanwhile, Cyril Ramaphosa's January 8 statement continues to fuel public speculation that President Jacob Zuma may be on his way out as head of state.
Whatever we do and however we do it, when it comes to the head of state, I want it to be clear to everyone. We are not going to do anything that will seek to humiliate and to disrespect the President of the Republic. We are not that type of people. We are respectable people. We are people who have decorum. And this is how the African National Congress will always approach matters that are important and affect the country as a whole.
And joining us in studio, Professor Sipho Siepe, political analyst. Mosiri Tsiane is with Mosiri Attorneys. Themba Godi is the chairman of Parliament's Standing Committee on Public Accounts. Oliver Dixon, a social political analyst, will join us on the phone line. Good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us. Are you here wearing your political hat, or are you more primarily looking at the investigation that centers around the State of Capture report? I'll start with you. In what Cyril Ramaphosa, or I suppose the ANC, NEC, is proposing in dealing with this matter first, that is the State of Capture report, before expanding the scopes. What is your view?
Well, the debates and discussions around the State of Capture report is a purely political discourse that requires a political response. And our understanding, wearing my political cap of the APC as a revolutionary party, is that in the first instance, a capitalist state is a captured state. That should be the starting point. And secondly, if we all agree that the capturing of state by individuals outside those elected is wrong in principle, then it behoves us to investigate any possibility of such nefarious acts having happened without having to pigeonhole ourselves to events that might actually have been triggered by motives that are very narrow and ulterior. It might as well be so that they've done that, but the responsibility of society and government is to make sure that the phenomenon is investigated and rooted out wherever it might be rearing its head.
But would the starting point to kick off the process be right, as what Cyril Ramaphosa suggests, that we start with what we have at hand, which are documentation, there has been witnesses deposing, etc., that it's easier to conclude this particular matter and then move on to the next one? Can this be used as a baseline?
No, I think the most important thing, we must go back to the public protector's report. What she said it was narrowed and limited precisely because there were budgetary constraints. And she did what she could do and then came up with that report. So that's the first thing, that if we wanted to deal with corruption and she had the resources, she would have looked at the entirety. So if you are committed to dealing with corruption, you can't use only the trigger and narrow it there. Then you are being selective, you are also being political, you're also being personal, you're also being expedient. So corruption, wherever it finds itself, needs to be dealt with. So the approach that the public protector, the current one, has said, understanding what were the constraints and limitations of the previous public protector, has actually endorsed the president's position to say, let us broaden it and deal with it. I do also agree that you may want to, for the issues of having to deal with the cancer right now, limit it, but you don't limit it to an individual or a family or a few people. What you try to do is that let's come and deal with it comprehensively. And I do think that also there's an issue here. We have given a lot of power to the public protector. Now, if you have the public protector now saying, I'm actually pleased with the broadening so that we are not seen to be personal, we're not seen to be vindictive. Let's broaden it. Let's make sure that all those, as the president put it, that there should be no area of corruption and culprit that should be spared to the extent of this commission of inquiry. So I do think that position is a position.
Yeah, but that position is not necessarily for the current public protector to make, because that process of the state of capture required, or rather it was the prescription, was to investigate a particular family, in this case the Guptas, and to look at ESCOM and other state-owned entities where they may have been involved, that the mandate was to focus only on the complaint of that particular alleged undue influence.
No. I think you should go back to what Temba was saying, that we've all agreed that corruption is a scourge in our society. And when you deal with it, there'll be a trigger. And that trigger is the one that gets you in. And as soon as you go in and you now have a judicial commission of inquiry, remember, the judicial commission of inquiry can on its own broaden it, even if somebody says it must be limited, because there is no way that you can deal with ESCOM and not deal with its history of procurement and all that. So anyway, whichever way you look at it, it will be extended, because the questions will continue to rise. You must always, to solve the problem today, you must also look at the genesis. But the point is, we have been saying and being in platforms, stadiums, talking about how corruption undermines our democracy, how corruption destroys business confidence, how corruption undermines even the delivery of service to our people.
I understand the necessity to look at it in, holistically, but there's been complaints about, or questions around, wasteful expenditure, that this process could be indefinite and we'll never get to the bottom of dealing with state capture. Mr. Godi, why then, if the proposal is to look at it from its more myopic format as it is now, why do you look at that as being a witch hunt, as opposed to a starting off or starting base?
Well, in the first instance, the report we're dealing with is that of the public protector. It does not belong to the individual, it belongs to the office. So when you have a new public protector coming in, she inherits all those historical reports and is the one who has a right to make comments on them. So I don't think she's off the line. Now, the issues that we always deal with in Parliament around mismanagement of public funds are things that cuts right across, and you find them in different departments, in different agencies. And I think politically and rationally, if you have an opportunity through a commission to investigate this, why limit yourself? Why narrow this when you may find that this particular issue you're dealing with is just but the tip of the iceberg?
Because why dealing with that, the popular narrative is that it would be a delay of seeing Jacob Zuma see his day in court and dealing with all these allegations of impropriety and also benefits for friends.
Well, look, I I think it's okay for other people to narrate it like that, but I think when we're dealing with matters of the nation, the focus is always on what is in the best interest of the country, not only today, but in future. You're dealing with the principle, not the person. If you limit yourself to the person, leaders come and go, but the country, the institutions, and the challenges remain. So I think if one looks at it narrowly in that context, then maybe you are dealing with factional issues. But for all of us as a country, because the commission belongs to the country, if it was an internal party thing, then that would be something else. But because it's a national institution that looks at the ills of the nation, then I think the reasoning and the approach will be different.
Your view, Masiri, whether it should be expanded, I suppose, we do have mixed reaction. But looking at the stance from President Jacob Zuma and Cyril Ramaphosa as ANC president.
Well, I for one see no legal justification that anyone can come and say today that limit this investigation only to a specific incident. I think that you would have no application. I believe that even if there is one that can be brought by anybody in the high courts, no court in South Africa can deny that in the interest of justice, you refuse a further investigation to cover all. Whether you base this on a presumption that we're only dealing with an order that deals with the then public protector. You already have got recommendations, a letter that is sent to the president saying, no, don't stick it around. We could not have investigated to that level. We want it expanded. You've got it from this new public protector. So legal bases are clear and set. And I don't think anyone rambling in a jungle trying to find any other resonance saying, no, stick only to this one will survive. It will not fly, not in South African court. Now, with regard to the two presidents, where does the center holds? Obviously, the center holds within the ANC. It's given that one. You can't disagree with that. But constitutionally, you've got a constitutional person who is representing, in this instance, it happens to be the president of the country, who needs to look at the best interest of all South Africans. And in this instance, the interest of South Africans will be best served by this investigation being expanded to include everybody else.
Oliver Dixon, political or social-political analyst, joins us on the phone line. Good evening to you. Can we deduce this to mean that if the state of capture inquiry is limited to the report, to Advocate Thuli Madonsela's report, that this in itself would suggest that President Jacob Zuma may not see out his term to 2019?
It is indeed true that there are substantive evidence that leads to Jacob Zuma being implicated sufficiently for him to actually see his day in court. It will happen, whether it's delayed or not. The delay of Jacob Zuma seeing his day in court should not come at the inconvenience of true justice. That's to say, we shouldn't just be saying, no, if we have a broadened terms of reference to state capture, it will delay Jacob Zuma seeing his day in court. I'd rather we have a delay in Jacob Zuma seeing his day in court than only having him seeing his day in court when there are so many other institutions, organizations, and persons who are implicated in state capture beyond just what we see in the state of capture report given to us by Thuli Madonsela. Importantly, we shouldn't let our haste for justice trump our deep-rooted seeking of quality justice and substantive justice being the end result. If a quick job is going to mean that we're going to get fewer people or we're going to get a limited view of what the depth of the rot really is, then we shouldn't have this investigation at all, because then it leads to divisiveness. It leads to feeding the narrative that only certain people should be subjected to justice and to the full wrath of the law.
Oliver, we're going to let you go. Thanks so much for your time. Oliver Dixon, social-political analyst. In the interest of time, in whether, what else do you read in what seems like the insistence? Of course, he's not speaking in his own capacity as ANC president. He would have the backing of the NEC. Do you think that this is generally a mandate of the NEC, that the probe is likely to just be on the state of capture report?
Well, I think one of the things that Godi likes, Temba puts nicely, is that you have issues of national importance, and then you have family issues. It may be expedient within the ANC that wants to get rid of Jacob Zuma, the president, to want to narrow it, hoping that he might be implicated and it might make things easier. But when you deal with the Judicial Commission of Inquiry, that is not the Judicial Commission of Inquiry of the ANC. And those of us and who have been pontificating about dealing with corruption wherever we find it, we should actually be consistent. We can't start coming out there and taking an expedient position because it serves our interest. The corruption affects South Africa as a whole, and Themba Godi sits in his main responsibility is to listen to irregularities, to corruption that everybody complains about. Now we have an opportunity, we have a Deputy Chief Justice who has actually been appointed to deal with it comprehensively. Yes, we can talk about the periodization in terms of limiting certain things, but you cannot start using this instrument to target an individual and sort out your family problems. Once you move out of the family, let it be a societal, national agenda, not a personal scores that has to be settled within the ANC.
But what would prevent the Deputy Chief Justice in just doing that and confining it only to the state of capture report?
Yeah, well, I don't think there's any. And I think, within the political class, there's need to be understanding, but also a need to support the work of the Deputy Chief Justice. Otherwise, the choruses that you hear, they are meant to shift, to direct, and to distract from a broader perspective, which has actually been the modus operandi of those who are enemies of African progress and unity, to always distract and to channel debate and focus. And always it is very narrow. And if you look at that, the issues that affect the broader African community are always isolated, put in the background, and particular issues around which were all channeled and headed towards. And I think we have to raise our voice to say, no, it cannot be. There is a counter narrative to the narrative that is being put around. Just look at ESCOM, for example. We have had the Tegeta issue, but I can tell you that today we met with the Financial Services Board team that is investigating cartels on the basis of the complaint that we've launched. And it is clear that what we're doing with the Tegeta thing was just the tip of the iceberg. But the public discourse has always been, if you deal with Tegeta, then you have solved all the problems in ESCOM. And that is not true. And so should it be with this inquiry, that it must not be that if you deal with what is in the state of capture report, then you have sorted out the issue of state capture. It is misleading, it is deliberate, it is part of the general trend post-1994 to narrow the focus and to actually center us around on a false flag chase.
So you're saying it would be a travesty of justice if we only looked at the state of capture report as opposed to dealing with matters that still plague us post-colonialism and apartheid, that we have the opportunity as a nation to once and for all deal with or confront, Mr. Godi?
Yeah, no, very, very, very true. The reality is that there is intellectual capture in the country, where the thinking and the disposition, the thrust of thinking and the choice of issues to be put at the fore is always the function of a particular section of society that has benefited from the previous dispensation and seek to control and direct the way everybody thinks. And I think it is that which we who are revolutionaries need to stand up and say, no, there is a counter narrative, there is a broader perspective, there is a broader problem beyond these few that have been raised that needs to be tackled.
Yeah, but besides our voices and the popular lexicon, that it needs to be broadened in the interest of the black majority, so we can uncover who's been capturing the state through evergreen contracts that are renewable automatically, etc. What does the judge, Deputy Chief Justice, would have to do if by law he is not restricted to expand, or it's his discretion to decide to work with a more narrower approach to state capture. There's nothing that the rest of us can do. This depends on him. Or maybe you can educate me on the process, Mosiri, legally, what happens now?
Well, I don't think there's any judge in this South African court system that can refuse any information, evidence presented to him and say, no, I can't take this because I'm limited to as far as this. He has to take that in consideration, even in his report. I mean, we've had whatever you can call Marikana Commission. There's been evidence that were not part and parcel of this investigation that we're giving, that came along. And the commissioner himself, the judge there, had to take that into account. You can't brush it aside and say, no, we're not dealing with that kind of a rod. We will only deal with this rod. That one has to be dealt with with another inquiry, not this one. This inquiry, this commission will reveal, no maganjani, it will reveal who has captured our state. In this instance, I think Mr. Goody has said enough, that the narrative that has been there has been to channel our thinking towards that specific direction in order to make sure that all South Africans are devoid from the truth. They don't see the truth from what it stands for. And in this instance, there's no way. There is no way.
Yeah.
Dream on, it will not happen.
But the ANC, obviously, the ruling party, can they be swayed as a collective to what we heard from President Cyril Ramaphosa?
Well, I think the matter is very simple. Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC have been saying, let's respect the institutions of democracy. And one of those institutions of democracy is the public protector. And Mogoeng, the Chief Justice, has spoken very strongly on that. Now you have a current public protector who has made a pronouncement. So the ANC cannot then choose that it now is convenient to ignore this public protector, when she has said that, given the very same argument that were made before, that the scope was limited because we did not have money. Now the president says, let's make money available. And there be no person who's going to undermine the workings of this. Now suddenly you now have a problem. This is why it's very important that the family issues must be separated from the national issues. So what I think the deputy president of the country was saying, he was simply referring to family matters. Family matters which really says maybe it would be convenient for us to deal with the problem that we have, and by narrowing it. But now that you have a Chief Justice who seemed to have been consulted, you have a public protector who has looked at it and is satisfied, I think let's deal with it comprehensively. Let it not be a personal vendetta. Let it not be political expediency. Let's root out corruption wherever we find it.
Yeah, very, very briefly in conclusion, do you see a common ground where there could be a middle road between the extension of the probe or its current form?
Well, I doubt, because these matters reflect political perspectives, they reflect ideological positions. I don't see them being reconciled. And insofar as the majority party is concerned, I think it reflects the kind of divisions that have existed. So I don't see them being reconciled. If anything, I see the hardening of attitudes and, a Chinese wall between these two perspectives.
And what does that mean going forward for the state capture investigation in its broader sense?
Well, I think the dominant voices in society that always seek to direct the discourse will seek to downplay it for as long as it does not focus where they want it to.
Closing remarks from you, Mosiri?
For the interest of justice and in the interest of all South Africans, this state capture commission, or rather the commission in itself, has to be expanded. We can't ignore it. It cannot be delayed that far. There's no need. The report or the reports done by both the previous public protector and the current one are simple, expanded.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. As always, Professor Sipho Siepe, political analyst. Mosiri Tsiane is with Mosiri Attorneys, and Themba Godi, chairperson of Parliament Standing Committee on Public Accounts and also the president of the African People's Convention. Oliver Dixon, a social political analyst on the phone lines. Thanks so much for staying with us. We take a quick ad break. Don't go away.